honest with you, Maria, it's going to be a delicate dance. And a lot of it is going to depend on how the Chinese respond. If they respond in a highly aggressive manner, I guarantee you the President of the United States has far more cards than the People's Republic of China. If, however, they're willing to be reasonable, then Donald Trump is always willing to be a reasonable negotiator. We're going to find out a lot in the weeks to come about whether China wants to start a trade war with us or whether they actually want to be reasonable. I hope they choose the path of reason. The President of the United States is going to defend America regardless.
Yeah, all right, a trade war with China. Well, apparently that's being rolled back now. We'll talk about that in a minute or two. But hey, folks, welcome to the Rescue Michigan Sunday night live stream. I'm thinking it might be a shorter one this week, but in the past when I've said that, I've proven myself wrong. So we shall see. But we do have some news stories to talk about, including first up is the shutdown, which, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being flippant in the title of this stream, but I mean, certainly there are people in America whose lives have been impacted by this, and not just the federal bureaucrats. Of course, the big one is the military. But I think by and large, I think most of us are probably like, oh, yeah, there's a shutdown. I forgot about that, you know, because this is the problem that Republicans have when there are these shutdowns, is that soon the American people start realizing I think it's a bad thing. And then the lobbyists start getting really, really upset because they need that money ASAP. But I mean, the first thing I say about this shutdown is it's premature to say what the result will be until it's all over. But right now, all the stories are saying the Republicans are digging in, and I hope that's true. The other big news is that Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, is firing thousands of federal workers. Sounds wonderful, but will it stick is the question. And you know, I'd love to believe that all these federal workers getting their pink slips saying, have a nice life. You're downsized. We don't have money for you, are more likely than not going to soon enough be getting letters saying, hey, by the way, the job has been funded once again, and we'd love to have you come back in. So maybe that won't happen this time, but you know, it's like the sun rising in the west and setting in the east. It really doesn't happen, and if it does happen, it probably means something else bad's going on too. So we don't know. We'll see what happens. But right now, we're going into week 3 of this shutdown, and the story is that the Republicans are digging in. They say they're going to keep this going as long as it takes. Blah blah blah, and they're trying these procedural moves, like for example, and this is kind of a smart one, running a bill to just get the soldiers paid. Sounds reasonable, and just smart play, because if Democrats do it and they go along with it, then they lose that leverage. And if they don't go along with it, then the Republicans can run ads saying Senator Slotkin voted against giving soldiers their pay. If they have the sense to do that, but you know how this. I mean, this is politics, so we'll see. But here's the thing that really, I mean, my inclination is going to be that the Republicans will buckle, because they always do. And they don't have to. So there is a story in the news. I've seen it. I was looking to see what the polls say about this. And I don't trust the polls on this entirely, because first off, I think they have a sampling problem, because I think most Americans, again, don't really know or care much about the shutdown. But for what the polls do say is that more Americans are blaming Republicans than Democrats. Again, all kinds of questions about whether those polls are statistically valid or not, but let's assume they are. This brings back the age-old question. Why don't Republicans just end the filibuster and end the shutdown? Well, there has been an article all about that in Politico this week, and here's the story. Senate won't touch filibuster to end the shutdown, Thune says. Senate Majority Leader John Thune shot down speculation that Republicans would deploy the so-called nuclear option to break in the funding stalemate. And look at the sneering subheadline there. The nuclear option has gained traction in some circles, mostly off Capitol Hill, i.e., you know, little peons like you and me are saying, Republicans, don't be idiots, end the filibuster and end the shutdown and do whatever you want for the next 2 years. And John Thune is saying, no, let's not do that. And here's what Thune says. There's always a lot of swirl out there, as you know, from social media, et cetera. But no, I have not had this conversation. Deploying the nuclear option where the Senate changes its rules by simple majority vote will require near unity in the Senate GOP. Here's the thing. And apparently the problem is the Republicans, clearly the majority leader does not support it, let alone if they get the caucus to it. But typically when the majority leader supports something or the president supports something, and if Trump was on the bully pulpit every day saying, why are we allowing the Democrats to control our agenda when we know perfectly well they will end the shutdown, the filibuster the instant it suits them? Back to that in a moment. But here we go. A larger swath of Republicans don't have much of an interest in getting rid of the hurdle. Nuking the legislative filibuster sparks unease and outright opposition within a number of GOP senators who worry that it will come back to bite them when they are in the minority. I want to know the names of these idiots. The Democrats have screened every single one of their members in the U.S. Senate to make sure they support ending the filibuster as soon as they are back in power. When the Democrats had all three chambers in the past term, they had two Democrats who opposed ending the filibuster, which are Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, both of whom are now gone. And every single new Democrat senator since then has been vetted and is on record saying, the instant we get back into power, we are ending the filibuster. Now, let me just back up in case people aren't familiar with this filibuster rule. It's that in the Senate, there's a procedure where an individual member of the Senate can be said to have the floor. And they can, theoretically, just keep on talking and talking forever and thereby holding up the business of the Senate. And somewhere along the line, someone got the bright idea that instead of actually filibustering, instead of actually talking on an ongoing basis for days and days and days, that they would just have to say, I intend to filibuster without actually doing it. And that okay, so that effectively it takes 60 votes to get anything through the Senate. And so unless one party's got 60 votes in the Senate and unanimity among the 60, then the opposing party can block anything. Well, some years ago, not too long ago, in fact, it was during Obama's term, the Democrat Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid was unhappy that the Republicans were blocking Obama's judicial nominees. So he just ended the filibuster for judicial nominees. No questions asked. No problem whatsoever. And then when Biden was in the White House and Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House and Chuck Schumer was the Majority Leader in the Senate, the Democrats said, hey, we have all three chambers. Let's end the filibuster and do whatever we want. And two Democrats got in their way, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who said, this is a bad idea. Let's not open this Pandora's box, yada, yada, yada. So every single Democrat senator is now on the record. Sinema and Manchin are gone. And Alyssa Slotkin was vetted. That's why she's on record saying, I support ending the filibuster. They all are. Because they know the minute that the filibuster becomes an obstruction to their agenda, they need it out of the way. And they'll do it. So what's this nonsense about Republicans not ending the filibuster when we could actually govern, when we know the minute we can't, they're going to just get rid of it anyway? Oh, it's a 100-year-old tradition. It's on life support. The only form in which this tradition still exists is as it serves to prevent Republicans from passing their agenda. But no, they are so clueless that they're happy to shoot down any talk of ending the filibuster and allowing themselves to pass their agenda in the Congress. So there you go. We'll see how this situation develops. Again, if I was a betting man, my money is on Democrats are going to win this one sooner or later. But we'll see. We will see. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I am wrong. And by the way, why isn't Trump talking about this? Well, as it happens right now, Trump and half his cabinet and half his family are on a plane to Israel right now to celebrate to ink their peace deal, which again, I hope wins. I hope it succeeds. I hope the peace holds. But, do we forget what happened when they had the peace deal? Remember the ceasefire? Remember the ceasefire at the beginning of this year? Then it broke down. Reportedly, Trump has really twisted Benjamin Netanyahu's arm on this one. And again, we will see. We will see. But Trump, who got snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize, we'll talk about that in a second, who has been obsessed with the Nobel Peace Prize, is off trying to make peace between Israel and Palestine. And as always, not focused on the domestic agenda, not focused on what's going on in Congress. And I got to tell you, folks, I thought the one guy who was really going to make Trump more successful in dealing with Congress and not being Congress's doormat like he was in his first term was going to be J.D. Vance, because at least J.D. Vance was in the Congress for a little while. He does know the U.S. senators. But, there's Vance just repeating the administration's line on this trade war stuff. And I've seen no evidence of him actually being engaged in congressional related things, and that's okay. I mean, it's not, he doesn't have to do those things, but nobody is. Nobody is. So anyway, the Nobel Prize was announced this week. And I am not surprised that Donald J. Trump did not win the Nobel Prize, despite his incredibly aggressive lobbying for it. Because fundamentally, who's the Nobel Committee? I mean, it's effectively, was it the government of Norway, I believe? not the government literally, but it comes from Norway. And if you look at who they've been nominated for peace prizes in the past few years, oftentimes they are what they call opposition leaders in various countries, where the party in power is the person that does not support the American European agenda. And no surprise, well, I guess a little bit of a surprise, I would have thought it would have been hard to find somebody less qualified for the Nobel Prize than Trump, but they found her. What is her name again? The Venezuelan opposition leader. Here she is. Maria Corina Machado, who has basically been an asset of the U.S. State Department and the National Endowment for Democracy, working to overthrow the regime in Venezuela. In the moment when Trump is planning a grand invasion of Venezuela, as we right now speak, the woman who might actually be the one who replaces the overthrown president of Venezuela. So that's who they picked for the Nobel Peace Prize. It's so weird to me. Is it weird to you guys why Trump cares about the Nobel Peace Prize? Like, when Barack Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize in his first year in office, when he hadn't done anything, when his nomination had to have come from January of the first year of his first term, and he had no accomplishments for peace whatsoever, I mean, unless you count murdering an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, with a drone bomb. I mean, that's what did Obama ever do for peace, let alone in his first year in office? At that point, the whole world, and especially Donald Trump, should have said, screw the Nobel Peace Prize. This is a prize that has no credibility whatsoever. It's a disgrace. If I was given it, I'd reject it. I'd say, I'm embarrassed that you guys have picked me for it because you are a discredited pile of garbage. That's what should have been the message. Instead, it was like giving the Peace Prize. I need the Peace Prize. I'm the best peacemaker ever. I've stopped 8 wars. I've stopped the war between Azerbaijan and Albania. Twice he said that, by the way. Azerbaijan, which is not a real country, and Albania, which was not in conflict with Azerbaijan. It was actually, he meant to say Armenia, but he didn't even know the names of the countries he claimed to have stopped a war with. Well, whatever. Whatever, fine. But maybe, again, another week has gone by where America has real problems, where we have a bunch of radical leftist terrorists who are literally militarizing against the U.S. government, an armed insurrection, where we have all the problems in Congress I just talked about. And Trump is out making peace in the Middle East. We'll see how that works out for him. It's a bad look. So what else is going on this week? Well, the good news is that there's one part of the Trump administration that's been doing some great things. And that is the branch that's going after his political enemies, apparently. Which, to be fair, so one of the people that got indicted this week was Letitia James, who, of course, pursued criminal charges against Donald Trump that were absolute bullshit from the get-go, and everybody in the world knew it. Now, she has been charged with the very felonies that Donald Trump himself was charged with. Mortgage fraud. But to anybody saying payback is always a bad thing and two wrongs don't make a right and all that kind of stuff, which, and I generally agree, two wrongs don't make a right. Here's the problem. Letitia James charged Trump on false charges because he didn't commit any mortgage fraud. The accusation that she leveled against him was that he overvalued his properties. The charge against her is that she claimed in her insurance records and insurance forms and tax forms that she was using a property as a secondary residence, which it wasn't. It was being rented out. So she was lying on official forms in a way that could only be interpreted as a lie in order to get preferential tax and insurance status, tax status and insurance rates. Dead to rights. So now she's coming back and saying, oh, it's such a minor thing. Everybody does it. It's against the law. What Trump did was not illegal. And in fact, not even true. Like they claimed Mar-a-Lago should have been valued at like what did they say? It was some outrageously low number. So they're going after her, open and shut case. I don't know. We'll see. Apparently the judge is a Democrat, so we'll see how that goes. And John Bolton's indictment's apparently coming soon. James Comey was charged, but for some reason not perp walked. They claim because, well, he was charged, but he wasn't actually, they didn't issue a warrant for his arrest. Why? Why not? I'm sure Roger Stone's not thrilled about that. In fact, I know he isn't because I saw his tweets about it, but how outrageous. How outrageous. But not all is well in the U.S. Department of Justice. And I'll tell you what, folks, I'm trying to get somebody on the show, and I couldn't get one tonight, from the National Association of Gun Rights to talk about the fact that now major gun rights organizations, including the National Association for Gun Rights, and I believe also Gun Owners of America, are calling for Pam Bondi to be fired because of how bad her record is on gun rights. So I'll show you, well, so it's a long video, but I'll just play the beginning of it. And you can see for yourself. And then we'll look at how, I'm surprised to say and sad to say, Harvey Dillon from the Justice Department has responded to this. So let me go first to the clip here. Let me make.
He had severe reservations. Today, your National Association.
By the way, for those who don't know, the National Association for Gun Rights is the most hardcore gun rights organization in the country. It was literally formed from people who got fired from Gun Owners of America for being too ruthless, frankly, to Republican politicians that didn't support the Second Amendment. And GOA, Gun Owners of America, themselves splintered off of the National Rifle Association for the same exact reason. And groups like the NRA have historically been establishment-based. They are friends with the politicians. They are in the Washington power structure, the Republican power structure. And therefore, they often fail to hold politicians accountable for their bad behavior. And I don't know how things are at the Gun Owners of America, since I haven't really been involved with them, at least not in the last several years. But I'll tell you, folks, a large number of Republican organizations have basically become Trump Inc. They are scared to death to criticize anybody in the White House, no matter what they say or what they do, because they don't want to lose access to the White House. You will never in the next 4 years see Breitbart News criticizing Donald J. Trump, no matter what he says or what he does. Not even for, the whole military, the Qatari military base in Idaho, which is not actually a military base, but, a lot of the pro-Zionist, pro-Israel influencers were freaking out about this story that Trump has allowed Qatar to train its fighter pilots in Idaho. Anyway, I'm digressing here. The point being, the National Association for Gun Rights, and I know these guys personally, a lot of them. I've met Dudley a couple of times, the guy on the screen right here. They are as hardcore as they come, and they will go after anybody, any politician, because the only thing that they care about is the gun rights. And Pam Bondi has been. Well, here, let's let Dudley tell the story.
Today, your National Association for Gun Rights is calling for Attorney General Pam Bondi to be fired. That's a tall order, and that may catch some of you off guard, but allow me to make the case plainly. Like many, we had severe reservations about the nomination of Pam Bondi. She didn't have a record of anything so extreme as supporting assault weapons bans, but she did have a tendency that I view a bit more pernicious. You know the phrase, death by 1,000 cuts? Well, Pam Bondi has held that knife more than a few times in her political career, and it's always the cuts from a supposed friend that hurt the most. When a Democrat stumps for full-blown confiscation, you and I at least know where they stand and what the threat level is if they were to take power. What is often more dangerous is when you deal with Republicans, particularly the kind who care more about image and polls than you do about restoring God-given rights. Make no mistake, I'm not saying Bondi is cut from the same cloth as Feinstein or Schumer. She's clearly better than whomever would have been in her place had Kamala Harris been elected. But is that the only standard by which we should judge? If that's the case, we should just pack this whole thing up because the bar is so low that we would never be able to mount a grievance. But gun owners didn't show up at the polls to get some slightly better than complete destruction of their fundamental rights. We were promised not simply a casual defense that the Republican Party has begrudgingly granted us over the years. We demanded and were promised real, tangible reforms and a reversal of decades of abuse. Some in our circle have been disappointed with Bondi over what they perceive as a lack of positive action. They're saying that the goal is unguarded and she won't make a strike. But it's much worse than overpromising or under-delivering. She's actively been playing goalie for the other side, going to great lengths behind the scenes to protect state power at the expense of your Second Amendment rights. And that is far more egregious than disappointing. That is active sabotage. I refuse to believe this is the best we can get. This year was and still is the greatest opportunity for gun owners in my lifetime. And that opportunity is being woefully squandered in real time right before our eyes. If you don't believe me or you think that I'm being unfair, let me walk through her record before her nomination, what she has done since, and then you be the judge. But be prepared, this is a very long list. The straw that broke the camel's back came this week.
By the way, folks, I told you I don't have a lot of material tonight. I'm going to play this whole thing for you because it's worth hearing. This is our U.S. Attorney General. Here we go.
When she convinced a federal judge to demand the member lists of 2 national Second Amendment advocacy organizations. But more on that in a moment. Let's start with her record as Florida's Attorney General so we can kind of establish a pattern. Exhibit A, Bondi opposed paying gun owners for their seized bump stocks. In 2019, Bondi succeeded in getting Florida courts to dismiss a case that would have called the seizures unconstitutional and would have compensated the affected parties. Exhibit B. In 2018, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi's office helped draft Florida's red flag gun confiscation law. She described how law enforcement could seize firearms without due process. Now, this law has stripped thousands of Floridians of their gun rights, including children as young as 8 years old. Bondi referred to the law as, quotes, the right thing to do. And she said, quotes,
let law enforcement come in and take the guns.
Sounds like she and John Cornyn would get along just fine. Exhibit C. Bondi sided with the state, upholding a ban on military-aged adults from purchasing a rifle, a position she seemingly still holds to this day. Exhibit D. Bondi was instrumental in shutting down the move for free open carry in Florida in the case State versus Norman. Despite a judge raising constitutional concerns, Bondi's team worked to block the case from being reviewed by an appellate court. At the time, the defense for Bondi was that she was just following orders on behalf of then Florida Governor Rick Scott. That under this administration, she would be free to be a pro-gun champion. So let's discuss how that has worked out. Exhibit E. Pam Bondi's Department of Justice still upholds Biden's engaged in the business ATF gun control rule. Rather than repealing the Biden era engaged in the business ATF rule that gave the ATF a blank check to crack down on private firearm sales, Bondi's DOJ has reviewed the rule for months while still enforcing it against gun owners. Reminder, this is the same rule that killed Brian Malinowski. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice repeatedly asked the courts to delay the legal challenges that could bring relief for gun owners. Exhibit F. Bondi's DOJ is advocating for lifetime gun bans for nonviolent offenses. Bondi's DOJ asked the Supreme Court not to restore the rights of nonviolent felons in Vincent versus Bondi. Instead, advocated for federal law to continue stripping gun rights from nonviolent offenders for life. Now, exhibit.
By the way, because not this one, but the one he mentioned before that, we should point out. Remember in the beginning of the Trump term, when Trump signed an executive order, is a big celebrated executive order saying, I'm directing Pam Bondi to review every single gun law and regulation in this country and get rid of everything that goes against the rights of gun owners. That and they were actually, she was tasked with coming up with a report about that within, I think it was 3 months, maybe it was 6. Either way, the report is not out, never came out. Anyway, let's continue.
G. Bondi's DOJ has repeatedly supported banning guns from military-aged adults. Bondi's DOJ is actively attempting to undermine the Fifth Circuit's pro-gun ruling in McCoy versus ATF, which held that the federal ban on handgun sales to 18 to 20-year-olds is unconstitutional. Meanwhile, her DOJ asked the Supreme Court not to overturn the Fourth Circuit's ruling upholding that very same gun control law. These actions support stripping gun rights from American adults who are old enough to fight and die for our country. Exhibit H. Here is the one that is absolute day one no-brainer. Stop the Department of Justice from continuing to prosecute anti-gun cases that were initiated under the previous Biden administration. Cases like Matt Hoover, Patrick Adamiak, in which regular gun owners were swept under an aggressive Biden ATF under the most trumped-up charges imaginable. These are just 2 examples of political attacks against the gun community. And yet, these 2 are still in prison and Bondi is still punching the gas. Disgraceful. Exhibit I. You may recall at the beginning of the year that Bondi was ordered to conduct a survey of all the Second Amendment infringements employed under the previous federal administration and report back with a plan to disassemble them in 30 days after the order. That was 8 months ago. As we can see, very little has been cut and even more has been championed by Bondi's DOJ. Exhibit J. In April of this year, Bondi went back to her roots. After the Cargill decision was handed down by the court, effectively overturning the bump stock ban, Bondi still argued that the state should not have to pay restitution to gun owners who had their property stolen. Exhibit K. A lot of alarm bells have been ringing that the ATF.
By the way, props to Dudley for calling seizures and confiscations theft, because that's what it is, even when the government does it.
Has been quietly building an immense 1 billion plus list of gun owners, aka a registry. In fact, I did a video on that just last week. There has not been so much as a peep from her or her DOJ on holding the ATF accountable to that law. Now, Exhibit L. Right as we sat down to write this on Friday, the 10th of October, we got wind that Bondi's DOJ is arguing to the Supreme Court that the National Firearms Act's taxation and registration requirements for short-barreled rifles do not violate the Second Amendment, stating that short-barreled rifles, which are legal in several other countries, are far too dangerous for the United States because they are especially susceptible to criminal misuse. That is a mind-numbing statement. And now we get to what really kicked all of this off, directly attacking national gun rights organizations by demanding their private membership lists. That's right. Pam Bondi's DOJ successfully scored a court order for 2 gun groups to hand over their members' private information to the federal government. What could go wrong? It's almost certain to include names, addresses, contact info. I think literally everything. In that very same lawsuit challenging handgun purchase rights for 18 to 20-year-olds, which is the McCoy versus ATF, Bondi's DOJ argued that a 2-tiered classification of gun owners, those who belong to the plaintiff gun rights organizations and those who don't. Then Bondi's DOJ argued that they had to know who the members of those gun rights organizations were so the DOJ could be sure to protect their rights and only their rights. Now, this is a clear violation of the First Amendment right to freely associate and to do so anonymously.
By the way, this is an issue that has been absolutely enormous in the conservative movement for at least over a decade now, going back to the Obama administration, and probably much further than that, honestly. But in my own experience with it, the IRS and other agencies have very aggressively sought to find out and acquire lists of members of conservative organizations. And In fact, many of them were literally directed by the IRS they were asked to provide their members as a condition of receiving their nonprofit status, to which they had to sue to get that requirement dropped, which is for very obvious reasons, because the government would, number one, leak the list to the public, and then literally give Antifa a target list. And this requirement of anonymity among activist groups goes back to the 1960s, to the civil rights era, and to a case, NAACP versus Alabama. And the genesis of it was that the state of Alabama, was trying to demand the NAACP's membership list for the same exact reason, because then they could give the list to white supremacist organizations. And because that black people had to be concerned that their identity might be disclosed if they supported the NAACP, that therefore they would not support the NAACP. That's why the court ruled in NAACP versus Alabama, it's so essential to the First Amendment that people have the right to participate in politics and to do so anonymously. And sadly, the court has still allowed that to not apply to really all forms of political activity, including campaigning. They have this weird, way, this two-tiered system where if you're a campaign that is running for office, then you have to disclose every single one of your donors, their names, their phone number, not their phone numbers, their names, their employers, their occupations. But if you're an advocacy group that does not say vote for so-and-so, then you have donor privacy. But donor privacy is absolutely critical to political organizations because it always is used against the minority. And frankly, in the political climate we had just 4 years ago, conservatives and especially gun owners were the oppressed minority. And that was a real threat to them. And once the government has that list of gun owners, it's there forever. That's why this is so absolutely critical and why it's so dangerous what Pam Bondi is doing.
But Bondi's DOJ thinks gun owners should have to choose between their First Amendment rights and their Second Amendment rights. And they told the court just that. Here is actually what they wrote verbatim. To be sure, the organizational members may have a First Amendment right to decline to disclose the identity of their members to defendants. But the organizational plaintiffs cannot have it both ways. The organizational plaintiffs cannot simultaneously decline to identify any of their members and at the same time insist that the court award permanent relief to unidentified persons whose membership has not been verified. Why is Bondi's DOJ playing hardball? If we're to believe her rhetoric that gun owners aren't second-class citizens, then why are they hurting instead of helping? These are the exact same tactics used by the DOJ under Joe Biden, and that is inexcusable. To be fair, Bondi's DOJ has done some good things for the Second Amendment, but those things are increasingly dwarfed by the ongoing and active harms this DOJ continues to perpetrate against gun rights. The absolute baseline for any pro-gun attorney general should be to first do no harm to gun rights. And in Pam Bondi's case, not only has her DOJ continued Biden-era gun controls, but is actively working behind the scenes against gun rights. With numerous anti-gun actions under Pam Bondi's belt, it's clear that any advances for the Second Amendment are being made at a snail's pace, if at all. And that's why now is the time to bring the hammer down on Pam Bondi for her relentless actions that betray the people she swore to protect.
And he neglected to mention, she also is hiding the Epstein client list too. So there's plenty more things wrong with Pam Bondi besides that, but that's one major thing. That's one major policy area where Bondi has been absolutely awful. And frankly, I talked all last weekend about issues with certain Trump administration officials, and yet almost nobody's been fired. Only Alex Wong. So not looking very good. Anyway, what else we're going to talk about tonight? I mean, those are the big things. Let me follow up with this story though, because that was Dudley Brown. As it happens, Harmy Dillon herself, the Civil Rights Division Director of the Attorney General's office, she responded to this post. So let me put that up on the screen. And here is what she wrote. Let me make this bigger here. Our AG Pam Bondi is the most pro-2A AG in U.S. history. And this is a bad take on many levels. Now, you see the lawyer's trick there, folks? The most pro Second Amendment Attorney General in U.S. history. Well, that's not saying very much now, is it? Compared to who? The Democrat Attorneys General? Compared to Bill Barr? It's actually probably not true, because we had Jeff Sessions, who was very pro Second Amendment. But in general, I mean, she probably wasn't even thinking about that. But Republican presidents have not generally had Edwin Meese. I don't know. So it's a silly statement and also pointless. So this is what she has. This is all she posted in that tweet, but there are more. So then she goes on, and by the way, this is again why I want to get someone from the National Association for Gun Rights onto the show to talk about this in more detail. But here is what she writes. Actually, here's what actually happened. After the Fifth Circuit held that the federal ban on federal firearm licensee sales, handgun sales to those under 21 violated the Second Amendment, the Attorney General declined to further appeal that ruling. The remaining issue was the scope of the injunction. The injunction is where the court says, okay, now you can no longer have this ban, right? This ban on handguns to those under 21. And so after a hard-fought win for the president on nationwide injunctions in Trump versus CASA, which that was the case, remember, where the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, basically, well, they tried to stop these radical left-wing activist judges from just imposing nationwide injunctions on the president's policies, like just some district judge can just tell the president what he can and can't do. So that's what this case was about. So now what Harmeet Dillon is trying to claim is that, well, since the Supreme, and by the way, the Supreme Court gave them a pretty big loophole that they've been exploiting ever since, but never mind that. That's not the point. Now Harmeet Dillon comes out and says, so you see, because Trump won this injunction, he won this relief against nationwide injunctions from these district activist judges. Well, therefore, the DOJ could not agree to a nationwide injunction in any other case, or any injunction that would effectively serve as a CASO workaround. Why? What do you mean? What do you mean they obviously could not agree? Of course they could. Because because the Second Amendment is correct. That's all there is to it. Anyway, so then she goes on. In the Fifth Circuit case, the DOJ agreed to an injunction throughout the Fifth Circuit, as well as an injunction for any known members of the plaintiff organizations located anywhere else. By the way, the other thing too is, why? I mean, that doesn't mean that the AG had to weigh in on this issue. You know, okay. So if there's an issue with the with the scope of the injunction, okay, let it only apply in the Fifth Circuit then. You know, until it gets to the Supreme Court, that's fine. Anyway, DOJ agreed to injunction throughout the Fifth Circuit, as well as injunction for any known members of the plaintiff organizations located anywhere else in the country. In response, the court ordered something the DOJ did not ask for. It ordered the plaintiffs to submit members lists. Yeah, and then you went along with that. On Friday, October 10th, DOJ and the plaintiffs submitted a joint filing asking the court to correct that misstep. That's just one example of what we do every day. So we'll see what they say. We'll see what the National Association for Gun Rights has to say about that claim. According to Harmeet Dillon, on Friday, the plaintiff submitted a joint filing asking the court to correct that misstep. So we'll have to look at the documents. Because what Harmeet Dillon is claiming is that the DOJ says, no, we don't need you to submit a member list, just that we don't disagree with the scope. We will see. We will see where this goes. He also accuses Pam Bondi of advocating for lifetime gun bans for nonviolent offenses. That's not a fair characterization of the DOJ position. Yes, it is. That's exactly what the Democrats always say. Oh, a red flag law isn't saying that we're just taking away your guns without due process. There's a due process. It's just not a constitutionally legitimate process. It's just that we have, these closed door ex parte sessions where we determine that you're not fit to own a firearm. I mean, when they're talking lifetime gun bans for nonviolent offenses, what they're talking about is when courts are talking about taking away your gun rights for things like misdemeanors or nonviolent felonies. DOJ has generally defended the 18 U.S.C. 922G while also simultaneously establishing a rights restoration process for nonviolent felons. Then she goes on, and we can stop at this point. The video is filled with inaccuracies, which she doesn't clarify, in what it says about the history and procedural posture of specific cases. The biggest problem with the DOJ doesn't say. Every day under Pam Bondi's leadership, this is the whataboutism stuff, DOJ persuades courts to tackle generational level 2A issues and take them in a pro 2A direction. Yeah, right. So, and she goes on to list a few things, which are maybe not as generational as forcing political organizations to close their member lists or red flag laws. You know, I get that. I get that she has to protect her boss. Like that's part of being a federal worker. But she didn't have to take the initiative to put all this stuff out. So we shall see. We shall see where this all goes. But again, gun rights organizations hopping mad about Pam Bondi, who has had a lousy gun rights record to begin with. And so far her record in office has been pretty bad too. So that's that story for tonight. And the other thing I was going to mention is, the trade war, the thing we started off the show with JD Vance there. So, again, we'll see where this goes, but you guys have all, I'm sure, seen Trump's tweet claiming that China has imposed these outrageous export restrictions on rare earths, as if the United States has never imposed any restrictions on any Chinese products ever, has it? No, we'd never do anything like, like trying to tax Chinese-made ships in ports or anything like that. No. But China has come right back out and said, if you want to fight, we're going to fight. You don't have a trade war, we'll have a trade war. And in response, Trump has now backed off of that. So we'll see how it develops. Remember what happened earlier this year? Trump announced 100%. No, it was more than 100%. I think it was something even more outrageous, but absolutely crazy tariffs on China. And then back in May, they reached some kind of deal. And apparently China's concerned that even back in May, they were going against that. So, the way that the administration says, the other side's always the aggressor, just like with, foreign policy. China was the aggressor. Why, we've never heard of anyone doing anything like this, except we do it all the time, every day to countries all over the world. But, how dare China come out and say what their rare earths can and can't be used for? How dare China say we can't use their rare earths to manufacture weapons for the war we're planning against them? Stuff like that. We'll see where it goes. But, Trump is, well, you heard what JD Vance said in that clip. He said, if China wants to go to war, they're going to find out that we're holding more cards than they do. And you remember Trump said that also to Zelensky, that you have no cards, this line about cards. It's a sign of a mental state, which is that of playing poker. This is a political poker game. And this is not a good way to do diplomacy, folks, because when your bluff gets called, it can turn out very poorly. But also the other thing too is what's happening with China is also what's happening with Russia on the military side of things, which is that positions are hardening. Like the big story in Russia this week was that Putin is getting more and more and more pushback from all parts of Russian society, from the Security Council, from the legislature, that he's not taking a hard enough line with the United States. He says, look, we had this meeting in Anchorage and then nothing came of it. Like literally right now, American-made HIMARS missiles guided by American operators are hitting Russian targets in Russia proper, even not even just the four territories like Belgorod, like parts of Russia. Americans are attacking Russia with American weapons right now. And a lot of people in Russia are saying this is an act of war. They are at war with us. Why are we still talking to Trump? Nothing has come of it. Nothing has happened. We haven't even restored we haven't even sort of basic diplomatic links. There's no Russian embassy in the United States yet. We haven't even gotten the basic stuff done. Nothing is happening. Why are we still dicking around with Trump and Melania? There's a story about Melania this week too, by the way. Putin won't be around forever, and positions are hardening. And the same thing's going to happen in China. They're going to say, look, you want an economic war? Okay. And this is not a good place, but this is what Trump likes to do, likes to mess with people and see how much they can be messed with. And that might work for, the British and the French and the Germans. It's not going to work with Russia and China. They know they have the cards. And they will call the bluff every single time. They know the state of our military versus the state of their military. How many hypersonic weapons do we have? Oh, none. I mean, you want to count the Trident? That's not the same thing. That's not the same thing as the Kinzhal. Those are ballistic missiles. It's a different thing. It's not like the Oreshnik, this medium range hypersonic that just goes up and down and just destroys something. Like most hypersonic weapons are hypersonic when they're in outer space, not when they're hitting the ground. Very different thing. But anyway, so since I brought it up, the Melania story, this is something that happened. Remember when Trump met in Anchorage? You might have remembered hearing a little story off to the side of that, which was that Trump gave Putin a letter from Melania Trump saying, please, Mr. Putin, think about the poor children and please stop hurting the children. And what it was all about was this accusation from Ukraine, which was that the war had caused all of these Ukrainian children to be separated from their parents. And this is actually why Putin was charged by the International Criminal Court for this, supposedly for separating children from their parents and preventing Ukrainian children from being united with their Ukrainian families. And the thing about the story was it was complete and utter BS. Like what they were talking about was the children in Donetsk and Lugansk and these other territories, which are now part of Russia, but were always ethnically Russian, who for the past decade plus were being shelled by Ukrainian artillery. And when the war broke out, well, the war is already broken out, but when the real war started in 2022, a lot of cities were evacuated and a lot of them came to Russia. And Ukraine made up this claim to, basically just to call Putin a war criminal. So Melania writes this letter, or maybe her staff did, I don't know. And really what it was, I don't know if Melania knew of it being this way, maybe her staff did, it was a big F you to President Putin, call him a war criminal, basically. But what Putin did was he said, okay, let's talk about this. And so lo and behold, what they end up doing is, forming a whole task force to reunite the children with their parents. And they did, by this is claimed to be like thousands of children. They found eight children who they negotiated to be relocated from one side to the other or vice versa. And, and that was that was a big story, I guess. But the point being that maybe, if Putin has, because let's assume Melania does not know all that backstory and just thinks I'm helping the children and, oh, look at this, he's trying to help the children because he liked my letter and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, that's what Putin's calculation is. Like, I still think I can get Trump and Melania, Trump through Melania, but also Trump, just directly to be more sympathetic to Russia. But I don't see it happening because it's just like with Anchorage. He meets Putin in Anchorage, and next week he's talking to all the neocons, all the jackals, and oh yeah, don't worry, we're going to keep sending Ukraine weapons and money. I'm sorry, we're not going to send them money. We're going to sell the weapons to NATO, who's funded by us, and then NATO will take our weapons and give them to Ukraine. Yeah, something like that. Whatever. Anyway, it's another big mess. And look, again, I hope things work out with the peace deal in Israel. We'll see how it goes. But I wish the administration was focused more on the American people, on Congress, on the shutdown, getting his agenda through, shutting down the Department of Education, shutting down these federal bureaucracies, things that he could get done if he just used his bully pulpit to force Congress to do these things. but he's not focused on Congress. He's focused, as always, on foreign policy, foreign policy, foreign policy. It's just like, it's something about Western leaders. I say Western because, like, I'm thinking, there's these Europeans, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, they obsess over Ukraine and Russia. That's all they talk about. They don't give I was going to say a bad word. They don't give a rip about their people. And that's why their approval ratings are in almost now the single digits. Their people hate them because they know they don't care about them at all. And it's just like when you become a Western leader, the notion of domestic politics is like, ew, icky. Like if you're a congressman, you ever see one of the earliest episodes? There's a show called House of Cards with Kevin Spacey. He plays a psychotic politician who becomes the president. But in the first season, he's a congressman, and he's doing all these deals and all this corrupt stuff. And one of the episodes, I think the third episode, like the very early on in the show, the episode's about his district. And he goes home to his district. He doesn't give a crap about his district, So there's this funny district stuff that's not important to him. But he's playing the game because he's got to, because they do elect him from time to time. But congressmen don't really care about their districts. Apparently, presidents don't care about their countries. They want to be on the world stage. They care about the global order. Well, maybe Trump should do what he campaigned on, which is caring about America for once. Hope he does more of it. We'll see what happens. That's it for this week, folks. We will see what happens. We'll see if we are still shut down next week. We'll see if the peace deal holds. Not holding my breath on either of those things, but we shall see. I just realized I have not been reading comments. Eugene Dixon, Russia is not our enemy, but the deep state is. I agree. Mark Ashley Price, gun rights are awesome. I agree. He also says Ms. Pam is a great attorney general. Couldn't disagree more. Also says Trump is the greatest president. And there you go. Good to see you guys, though. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Jones Clinton. What was this? He's asking for help. I don't know who this person is, though. So there you go. But it's on their tweet. The post is on Facebook. Also, Mark says, people, please run for local office if you can. Local office is important too, like higher office. I do agree with that. All right, folks. I always forget to say it, and I should have said it in the beginning of the stream, but if you like the content, hit the like button. It does help. And leave a comment. Also, that helps as well. If you disagree with things I'm saying, even those comments still do help. So do all that good stuff. And until next time, thank you for all I do for liberty. And until then, peace.